You're listening to episode 152, Kelly's Story, a daughter with epilepsy. Hello, my friends. Welcome to Child Life on Call. This podcast is a safe place for parents to share their stories about what it's like to have a child that has a medical experience, diagnosis, disease, and or everything in between. We know there's power in sharing stories, and that power multiplies when you can listen to other parents who have walked a similar path to yours. Giving and getting advice is great, but hearing how another parent navigates the complexities and nuances of healthcare is even better. As a child life specialist, my role is to support, validate, and provide emotionally safe spaces for kids and their families, and I am so honored to be on this journey with you. In addition to parent stories, we sprinkle in some expert episodes every now and again that have content for both parents and professionals in the field of healthcare, all with the mission to empower parents to be confident advocates and partners with the care team during healthcare experiences. We're so glad you're here. Hello, my friends. I'm so glad that you're here today. I have such a lovely woman to introduce you to, and once you hear her voice and get to know her, even just for 30 seconds, I know you're going to want to follow her, to learn more about her, and share her joy, her wisdom, her stories, her experiences with other parents that you meet. Whether it's yourself and you want to do a deep dive into more of Kelly's goodness, or you're a healthcare professional and you just want to introduce a parent that you're working with to another parent who gets it, Kelly is your person. I am so honored to be able to share with you a little bit about Kelly Cervantes and her family and her beautiful daughter, Adelaide. I do want to give you a trigger warning that Adelaide has passed away, so if it doesn't feel like it's a good time for you to listen to this episode, I totally get it. We talk about her passing towards the end of the episode, so just to give you some warnings about that. Thank you, Kelly, for being the wonderful mom and advocate that you are. Let's get started. Before we jump into the episode, I wanted to let you guys know that if you are a parent, a child life specialist, or professional working with children, you're going to want the hospital or physician's office or urgent care that you take your kids to have the Child Life On Call app. It is an evidence-based tool designed to empower children and families during medical experiences. And 100% of the child life specialists who have used this app believe that it can help with expanding child life's reach beyond the bedside. And 100% of child life specialists believe it helps parents feel more empowered in their child's care. Learn how to get the Child Life On Call app for your facility or doctor's office by going to childlifeoncall.com/partners.
My name is Kelly Cervantes. I am a writer and podcaster and advocate, also a mom and wife. And I entered the disability, medically complex epilepsy, frequent flyer hospital membership world in 2016. My daughter Adelaide was born in 2015, and normal pregnancy and normal delivery. And then things started going downhill pretty quickly, but not, she wasn't putting on weight. She had low muscle tone, nothing that would foreshadow what was coming around the corner. At the time, I had a son, Jackson. He was 3 at the time. And then my husband, Miguel, who some folks may know as Alexander Hamilton he did it for the full run in Chicago, and now we're in New York and he's doing it on Broadway here. And in fact, it was the very same week that Miguel booked Hamilton that Adelaide was diagnosed with epilepsy. She had had her first seizure a week prior. And I was actually I was working full-time, selling and coordinating events for a big restaurant group in the city. I was our family sugar mama. Miguel was like in between jobs, and I supported us, and I was about to transfer to a new restaurant group, and uh, I was out to dinner with friends, colleagues, celebrating my last day at the previous group, and got the call from Miguel that he had booked Hamilton. And I remember sitting on the train on the way home and realizing that, we were moving to Chicago and that our daughter had epilepsy. We had gotten the diagnosis 3 days prior, and um, that our whole world was about to drastically change. I, I left working. I haven't had a traditional employer since then. I became Adelaide's round the clock caregiver. She would be diagnosed with infantile spasms 2 months later, which is a particularly devastating form of pediatric epilepsy. Uh, and then we moved to Chicago, and within 5 days of being in Chicago, she's being rushed to the hospital because her oxygen levels are so low. And that just sort of became our normal, me trying to balance Adelaide's medical life, therapy life, trying to figure out how to also be her mother, which I was taken. That piece of it surprised me. When you are a full-time caregiver, sometimes you lose sight of the most basic roles that you have in someone's life. So sometimes, I had to make time to be her mom and not just her caregiver. And then trying to maintain some sense of normalcy for Jackson, and, be supportive to Miguel and keep our house running. And it was a little crazy for a while there.
Yeah, you're speaking and I can just feel the piles like coming on, all these transitions in your life as a mom and a wife. And I think what you brought up about being the mom and not the caregiver is so important, because there's just this fine line, and it doesn't always, I'm reading this book right now and they had the perfect metaphor for it. It's like a chalk line, and sometimes you erase it and draw it closer, and sometimes you erase it and put it farther away, because there's times you want to step up and you're like, just let me do it. I do it the right way and I want to make sure it gets done. And then there's other times that you're like, you take care of it. I'm going to be the support role. Like, I'm going to stand back as mom. And that probably changed a lot.
It did, significantly. And it changed frequently over the course of her life. I when you enter this world, you have to learn how to be an advocate. That same week that Adelaide was diagnosed, Miguel booked Hamilton. One of my best friends from high school, her mother passed away when she had a rare disease, and I had been emailing back and forth with her. We were both in the hospital, different hospitals. I was trying to figure out Adelaide's seizures, and she was in the hospital managing her own things. And I'll never forget, she sent me this email, and it essentially said, have the fight. You will learn to know your daughter better than anyone else and have the fight. Build your team, but stand up for what you believe in. You're going to have to fight for her. Doctors don't know everything. And at that time, I was so taken aback by that advice, because I thought, I don't have a medical degree. Of course, I'm going to defer to what the medical professionals want. But as time went on, I understood more clearly what her words meant, because I would joke that I had a PhD in Adelaide.
Yeah.
I am not a doctor in any stretch of the imagination, but I did know her best. And that unfortunately carries its own heavy responsibility, to be told, well, what do you think we should do? You know your daughter best. And I'm like, I don't, sometimes I didn't want to be the one making that decision. I'm like, that's so much pressure. And then if I choose wrong, then it's on me. I'd rather, if it goes wrong, blame someone else. So, it is tough. We do know our children best, but my gosh, is that a heavy responsibility to bear?
Right. It's, even as you're speaking, it's like this total empowerment. Like, no one knows their child like I do, or knows my child like I do. And then also that like realization, nobody knows my child like I do. So I have to be the one. And as you're kind of explaining your family system and moving, it sounds like you have to be the only one for a lot of it, moving and your son, it's a lot. And when you have a supportive partnership, that's that's incredible when you can find someone to kind of live that partnership with. But it does come down to you, right? When you're the one in the hospital with her, advocating, making notes. Um, how did you find your voice with the care team? Did it all of a sudden kind of dawn on you, or did it take time, or did you feel more comfortable with one care provider first and then another at another time? How did you develop your voice?
It definitely took time. It took me getting an education. I call them my Google dumpster dives, where I would just, I mean, rabbit holes that I would
Yeah.
go down. And, I don't, you talk to doctors and they say, don't do that, but you have to educate yourself. And I
Yeah.
get it. I get why they don't want you to, because not all the information out there is is right. And there is often a spectrum when it comes to a lot of these rare illnesses, especially epilepsy. And so it can be challenging. But once I found that I understood the terminology more,
Sure.
once I started communicating with her care team using their terminology. So
Mhm.
instead of saying, her spit, calling it secretions, instead of,
Wow.
she had a fever, she was febrile. Like, I would start to use the doctor's
Mm.
terms. And then I found that they would listen to me more and respect me more, and we could have a more honest dialogue.
Yeah.
Um, because I think that a lot of times care providers, they're managing a situation in a lot of these chronic illness conditions. And the more that we can show that we are part of the team, that we are an educated part of the team, um, the more, or the less rather, we have to fight to be a part of the team.
Oh, I love that advice. And I think it's really overwhelming when you think about learning about an illness like epilepsy or any kind of complex, and even RSV, no matter how small, how big, you're exhausted, you're overwhelmed, you're in fight or flight mode. And so learning on a complex topic you've never heard before is challenging. But you're giving little pieces of this, like, okay, just think about febrile, think about secretions. You don't have to learn it all overnight, but just start to build up your repertoire of medical lingo and terminology. And I tell this to parents all the time: make your clinicians write things down so that you can actually understand the words they're saying. Because sometimes the words come out and you can't repeat them later. Write like a doctor would. So when you write your notes, assess your child, look at them, think about their symptoms so that when you communicate with them, you're able to have that really productive conversation. And it doesn't happen overnight, like you said.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree with that more. I have the notes app. I was actually just looking through the notes app of my phone trying to find something else. And I, went
Ah,
back and was finding,
yes.
years old notes that I had taken during various inpatient visits with Adelaide. And, it's wild to look back on that and on that life. The other piece I think that helped me find my voice was in talking with other parents who had been through something similar.
Yeah.
Asking, "Hey, this happened when we were inpatient," or "the doctor said this when we were in the clinic. What do you think of that? Is that normal?"
Mm,
Um, because you don't know what you don't know. So just having those conversations, being able to talk to a veteran of the system
mm,
and hear from them, well, yeah, it can take 3 months to get into this specialist, but you shouldn't wait that long. Call this hospital and see if you can get in
right.
there. Like, all of these little experiences it was just so helpful to be able to connect with other families who had already walked this path before me, because as even if it's a rare illness, even if you are completely unfamiliar with it, there are a lot of universal experiences, and we're just not that special. Someone has walked this path before us, and
Right.
and picking other people's brains was hugely resourceful for me.
Right. It's like you start with the search bar of Google, right? And then you make your network as small as possible to the few handful of people you trust, just like in your regular life, right? So we know all of these people, but there's just a few that you trust. And you can find that in the medical parent, medical mom community. I
Absolutely.
hear it time and time again. There was part when you wrote to me in the questionnaire, you talked about some of the hardest parts of caring for a child that has epilepsy. And those are some of the most difficult to talk about and some of the scariest to hear. But I think it's helpful for other parents who have a child with epilepsy or any other condition that requires you to be on your A game all the time to know that the feelings you have in those moments and after are quote unquote normal, right? That other people have thought them too, and that it is scary and it is real. Can you talk about some of those up and down moments with Adelaide?
Absolutely. I mean, so we never, I think we had control of her seizures for maybe the longest stretch was 2 months. They always came back. Um, and, you know, people say that you never get used to seeing your child or witnessing a seizure. And while I do think there is some truth to that, it never gets easier. I mean, Adelaide, for like a year and a half, she would have these horrible seizures where she would scream bloody murder. She would seize and then start screaming again. And it was a cluster, and it would last anywhere from 15 to 20 minutes. And, they were horrible, and they happened like clockwork every morning.
Mm,
It was just inevitable. And then she
right.
might have a few other seizures scattered through the day. And, but they sucked, and they were
Yeah,
scary, and um, nothing made them better, um, except for maybe having a plan, uh,
sure.
whether it was a short-term plan of what we knew to do to help her
Mm,
when she was having a seizure, and then long-term medication plans and treatment plans, and when the if slash when this medication doesn't work, we're going to try this one next, or we're going to add that,
sure.
or we're going to increase this, or we're going to go get this scan. All sort of gave me peace of mind, and it helped me to feel like I had control over something that I had no control over.
Sure.
Um, because it's devastating to not be able to help or control something that is happening to your child
Mm,
in that regard. We can yell at our children not to run across the street without looking, but we can't yell at our child to not have a seizure. These
right.
And it's so frustrating to be so powerless. So I found power in the places that I could, and one of those was in having a treatment plan, or having knowledge, building the best team for her. All of those things helped. And then there's also the aspect, her Adelaide seizures were debilitating. They were disabling when she had infantile spasms, and we would get control, and then it would come back and we would get control, and she would regress every single time. Oh, she lost her smile around the time that she turned 2. And we never saw her smile again. Um, Eventually, she used to suck her thumb, and that was like her sole source of comfort. At some point, she was unable to get her thumb into her mouth, and if she could get her thumb into her mouth, she wasn't strong enough, or couldn't coordinate the muscles to
Right.
suck her thumb. And watching her lose these skills, I mean, it just sucks.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't, we can hope and we can dream, and it's, that there's something down the pipeline that's going to help. I learned a valuable lesson in growing comfortable with disability. And, in the beginning, I was so concerned about her milestones and, that she would walk and that she would talk. And I grieved that. And I needed to grieve that. And that's worth grieving, the idea, this idealized life that you imagine for your child and for you to have with your child. And when you start to understand that that's not going to be it, there comes a place for acceptance of that. Sure. And sort of moving forward with the brilliant person that they are, because they can still communicate and they can still be mobile in assisted ways. And I had to learn to accept that disability. And that once I did, that opened up a whole other world for me. And a lot of those regressions were a little less painful as time went on. Of course, you never want to see your child moving backwards, but
right.
It doesn't change who they are. And so
Sure.
that certainly helped. I'm sort of going all out of order here, but
I think that's really helpful, because my next question was really understanding what did help you through that, right? So these unbearable, unimaginable, incredibly painful circumstances. And you've said a couple great things. You said the plan, no matter short or long term. You said acceptance, right? And just, this is what it is, and this is what I can handle, and this is what I can deal with. And were there any other things? You mentioned mom. You're actually giving us, as we're just kind of talking through this, but these mom groups that you could be a part of. And there's so much power to someone else saying, yeah, this sucks, and really understanding that.
Yeah. To that end, becoming, I learned to be an advocate for Adelaide. But one of the most empowering pieces was also becoming an advocate for others. And I was able to do that through my work with CURE Epilepsy, which is a incredible organization that raises money for epilepsy research. And I had actually, some things in the world are just, I hate the phrase that things are meant to be, because I can't look at my child's life and be like, that was meant to be. Like, I can't reconcile that, but there are certain things where you're like, make you go, So when I was working for the restaurant in New York, I helped coordinate an event for this organization called CURE Epilepsy. Adelaide was not born yet. I knew nothing about epilepsy. Wow. They were headquartered in Chicago. I didn't help put together this fundraiser for them. Didn't really think anything else about it until a couple years later. Adelaide is diagnosed. We find out we're moving to Chicago. And one of my coworkers was like, hey, didn't we plan an event for a company or a nonprofit out of Chicago with epilepsy? And I was like, oh my gosh. So I reached out to them and met the founder, Susan Axelrod. She actually came, that one of Adelaide's first hospital visits, she came and visited us in the hospital. And I will always remember her walking in and just sort of the look on her face as she turned to like the crib and saw Adelaide all hooked up with the EEG. And her daughter is my age. So she had been through this, decades prior, but it was still, you could see that it still affected her. It was still sitting with her. And to me, that was very telling, that this was always going to sit with me. If this woman, decades later is still affected by this, it doesn't. These are big emotions. I am not irrational for feeling them. And totally. That camaraderie with Susan and seeing this woman who had experienced and gone through so much was incredible. And so, through a friendship with her, through my past experiences, randomly helping them plan a fundraiser years before I started to grow more familiar with this organization. I come to find out that they had been doing a team science infantile spasms initiative, same diagnosis that Adelaide was
Wow.
doing, this multi-location, all of these scientists working together, hoping to discover something about infantile spasms. And actually, just within the last few months, we have learned that one of those scientists in particular has a lead that could very possibly turn into a new treatment.
Wow.
So there is, for me, learning about the research,
Sure.
being a part of that. I get to look at the grants before we fund them and fundraising for this. But one of Cure Epilepsy's tagline is, through research there is hope, and I 100% believe that. Now, Adelaide passed away. We are the crummy end of this story spectrum. We are the worst case scenario, and I always try and warn people of that it doesn't always end like this, but sometimes it does. And
Yeah.
And it super sucks. So Adelaide passed away 5 days shy of her 4th birthday in 2019. Science wasn't able to catch up to her. And but that doesn't mean that science can't catch up to other patients. And what we are learning about epilepsy as the community comes together, as we are developing standards of care for all sorts of different conditions, it's really remarkable. Yes, science takes forever. Yes, getting new drugs and treatments takes forever. Yes, cures can feel like they are impossible, but they are not. And the only thing standing between us and a cure is money for research.
Right.
Literally the only thing. We just need the scientists to do the research. We need to pay them to do the research,
Yeah.
and push that forward. And the really amazing thing about CURE is that they're funding. So the government, for example, the National Institute of Health, all these different government organizations, they will fund bigger ideas that have already been proven. But someone has to fund that idea to
Sure.
to prove it to the government that it's a viable thing for them to fund. And that's where CURE comes in, is that we can fund these young investigators, these people who are interested in the field of epilepsy. They can't get funding from somewhere else. Maybe their idea is a little outside of the box. CURE checks it and makes sure that it's still viable. We're not throwing money away, but they will fund this research, and then it can take on a life of its own, as it did with this infantile spasms initiative.
Wow.
We funded these team of scientists, and now it's entirely possible, years later, that we could get a new treatment. And maybe that treatment wouldn't have worked for Adelaide, but I like to think that, there are other children who are yet to be born, other children who are yet to be diagnosed, who, this potential treatment could and will benefit. And that, to me, is the hope. That, to me, is, I get to fight and work with an organization so that even though it is so crappy that I had to lose my child, I can know that her fight wasn't in vain, that her spirit gets to live on in this research. And it doesn't make it worth it, but it makes it something more than sucky.
Oh my gosh. It's so substantial. And I have the honor of being able to see your face as you're talking about this. Can you describe the feeling that you're having right now when you think about being a part and being the voice of this organization, and the call you got that said, we may have something for infantile spasms? What does it feel like to be a part of that?
Oh my gosh, it's exhilarating. I After Adelaide died, you losing your child is unimaginable, right? But you don't just lose your child. I began to fear that I was going to lose this community as well. And this community had grown to mean so much to me. They had lifted us up. These were some of our closest friends now. They were the people who understood. We'd lived this crazy medical life with seizures, and she would stop breathing. And I mean, there aren't a lot of people that can get that. And even though Adelaide had died, all of that
Yeah.
trauma still lived inside of me. And I was so terrified to lose this community. Being a part of Cure Epilepsy has allowed me to maintain those ties with doctors, with researchers, with clinicians, but most importantly, with the families.
Right.
And that is worth so much to me, to have that piece of it's not peace of mind, it's peace of heart,
Sure.
peace of
Oh,
soul,
yeah.
to like still have a connection with these incredible people who mean the world to us, who lifted us up, and to be able to lift them up in return and to continue to fight for them. And to
Mhm.
do so in Adelaide's name it's more fulfilling and a greater honor than I could have imagined at the outset of this journey.
It's sounding to me so much like that hope that you cling to. And when you receive a diagnosis for your child, and like you said, and there's nothing you can really do about it. That you can't change the pain, you can't change when they're going to come. You don't know that you're going to ever have those feelings of exhilaration or hope or joy again. And so you sitting here and sharing that with us, and I get to see it on your face right now, is just so wonderful. And I want to learn more about how people can get connected to Cure Epilepsy, but I just have one more question for you before we close. And when I ask guests to come on, I send them a questionnaire so I can get to know you ahead of time. And one of the questions I asked was, what has your child taught you through this experience? And you so eloquently put, it's not my child's job to teach me or anybody anything. And I love that, because I think that question should be looked at a little bit more. So you're making me rethink that. But I would love to know, what have you learned about yourself that Adelaide has shown you and revealed about who you are, Kelly, as a woman and a mom and a wife?
That I am fiercer than I
Mm.
ever imagined. That I
Oh,
am
girl,
not
you're giving me chill bumps. I'm not kidding. I can feel it through the web.
that I
Uh,
am more than that B minus I got in human physiology. Take that.
right?
I turned that around and learned everything there was to know about the brain.
Yeah.
Um, um, she taught me, I mean, she taught me patience. I you ask my parents, and they would not ever say that patience was one of my stronger attributes, but I didn't have a choice with Adelaide. I had to
Mm.
learn patience, um, and it turns out I can be patient, um, especially when it's a helpless child, right?
Right.
Um, she taught me that communication was so much more than verbal. You
Mm.
know, goodness gracious, that child could, she didn't need words to express herself. It was all in, emotive cries or grunts or eye rolls, or
Mm.
we knew exactly what it was that, she did or did not want to do.
Right.
Um, and it's such a beautiful thing to I don't want to say that, because I'm not in her body. I don't understand it, but to grasp this other side of a human experience
Right.
that you will never understand until you're forced to, until you are
Yeah.
confronted by it. And um, different is different, and it's beautiful, and it's not bad. It's not wrong. Disabled is not a bad word. Epilepsy is not a bad word. They just are. And I freaking hate epilepsy. I hate it so much, but I love my daughter.
Yeah.
And you can have all of these contradictory emotions. That doesn't make them false.
Well, I'm so grateful to you, to Adelaide and your family for coming on and sharing so much of the personal and the hard parts about this too. And I can feel her through you. I absolutely can. You are so dynamic in your communication. And so I know that that's in big thanks to her. And if people want to follow along with you, learn more about Cure Epilepsy, how can they do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So cureepilepsy.org is Cure's website. You can find all sorts of information there about epilepsy, about the research that they're doing. The podcast that I host for Cure Epilepsy is called Seizing Life. That lives on their website as well, but you can get that anywhere that you listen to podcasts. And then my website is kellycervantes.com. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter at KellyGC411. I have a blog that I write, release every Friday, and I can go back and look through old blogs from when Adelaide was alive. I talk a lot about my grief journey after losing her. We're in the process now of adopting, and so I write about that. It's sort of a hodgepodge of whatever is crazy things are going on in our life. And then I have a book coming out November 7th. We have the official publication date, November 7th of 2023. It's called Normal Broken, the companion for when you're not sure you want to heal. So it is about my grieving and healing journey, and hopefully people can pull pieces from there about what I've learned over the last 3 years. And regardless of whether they've lost a child or a parent or a spouse or a sibling, our journeys through grief are wildly different, but there are some strong bonds and similarities that are the undercurrents through it all.
Well, I cannot wait to read. I'm going to put it November 7th, 2023. I cannot wait to read what you have created. Anything, just give it all to us. So Kelly, thank you so much for being with us. And it's just an honor to get to know you and Adelaide's story.
Oh, thank you so much, Katie. Thank you for letting me go on and on about her.
Forever.
It's a joy.
I love hearing about her. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining us on the Child Life On Call podcast. The only reason this podcast keeps on going is because of you and listeners like you. So please join in on the conversation with us on Instagram, Facebook. I'm even on TikTok now, y'all, making a fool of myself. I haven't danced yet, but maybe it's coming. You can find us at Child Life On Call. We also have a website, and that has all of our information about the Child Life Circle, about the Child Life On Call app, and a blog with new information all the time. That's childlifeoncall.com. Thank you again from the bottom of my heart for listening to these episodes and being a part of this community. We are so grateful and so honored to be able to provide this for you.